If you feel like an affair could never happen in your relationship, then stay tuned, because in this video, we are exploring why affairs happen in the first place, how anyone can fall into this trap, and most importantly, how to prevent that kind of thing from happening. Hello and welcome back to the channel. If you're new here, my name is Wes and I am a couples therapist based in Chicago. In today's video, like I said, we're going to be diving into affairs, cheating, whatever you were to call them. It's not something that anyone wants in their relationship, but it's something that happens all too frequently. We're going to talk about the research from Dr. John Gottman and Dr. Shirley Glass, talking about how you might slide into an affair over time, and a little bit of information about how you can begin to bolster your relationship so that it's protected against affairs in the long run. All right, let's get started. So when we talk about affairs, I'm really going to be drawing from two main sources in this video. First is What Makes Love Last, a book by Dr. John Gottman that goes over his research in this area. And the other is research done by Dr. Shirley Glass, who spent her entire career as a PhD researcher in psychology focusing on affairs and how you can prevent them. When we talk about how affairs begin, the most important thing to think about is emotional intimacy. Dr. Shirley Glass came up with something that she calls the walls and windows theory of relationships. What does she mean by that? Well, the walls and windows theory talks about how every relationship has walls and it has windows. If you think about your mental world as a house, then in that house, there are walls and windows. Now, in an ideal relationship, you have a window through which you can see and reach out to your partner. That window is the metaphor for emotional vulnerability. You're able to share intimate details of your life with your partner, and you build up emotional intimacy with that person by creating this kind of transparent window that you're able to reach through, that you're able to speak to, that you're able to reach out through. So just think about the window as an opening to connection with that other person. Now, what are the walls? Well, the walls in the house are what you would call boundaries. Boundaries between you and the rest of the world. So outside of your partner, you have clear, defined emotional boundaries between yourself and other people in your life. However, the people who it's most important to have those boundaries with are people who could be romantically interested in you. For Shirley Glass, an affair begins when your window begins to shift away from your partner and more towards somebody who's outside of the relationship. So maybe a close friend or a coworker or somebody that you meet outside of your relationship who's interested in you. Well, that's where Dr. John Gottman's research comes in. He talks about the slow downward spiral into infidelity, and this is what that could look like. So imagine we have two partners, okay? There's Sarah and there's Tom. Now, Sarah and Tom start off their relationship really close. They obviously love each other, and they begin to date and eventually get married, and everything is really going well. The problem is, eventually, Sarah starts a brand new job, and she's really crushing it at this new job. In fact, it begins to take up more and more of her time as she's given more and more responsibility. She comes home stressed from work, and she talks to Tom about her day, or at least she tries to. However, when she tries to share things with Tom, she notices that Tom, who has his own demanding job, is kind of distracted a lot of the time. Sometimes he's looking at his phone, sometimes he's watching the TV, sometimes he's just kind of preoccupied with his own thoughts around his own work and all of the things that are on his to-do list. So as she begins to try to share more and more, she realizes that she's really not connecting with Tom. Tom's not really there. He's not really listening to her in the way that she wants. This feeling of being missed hits Sarah hard. She doesn't feel as close to Tom as she used to. And when she tries to bring this up with Tom, Tom just gets defensive. He says, no, of course we're close. In fact, they even try to go on some trips together, but Sarah notices that the same thing begins to happen even on their trip. Tom is always on his phone, he's checking other things. He's not really there present with her. So what happens? Well, Sarah realizes that she just can't lean on Tom as much as she used to. And she doesn't necessarily realize this consciously. She may not even realize it in the moment. She may just feel this sense of distance, of disconnection with him, and be kind of dissatisfied. However, she's at work, and she's working long hours, and she begins to connect with someone on her team. Now, this guy on her team is just a friend at first. She talks to him more and more, and, they put on more projects together, and eventually Sarah and this new guy, we can call him Jonathan, begin to connect more and more and talk more and more often. Sarah begins to share things that are stressing her out. She starts to share more about her kind of day-to-day life, more of her vulnerabilities with Jonathan, because she knows that Jonathan is there. He's interested. He's curious about her. In fact, Jonathan begins to share some things with Sarah too, and Sarah likes that. She likes being able to have this reciprocation with him. Eventually, Sarah stops confiding in her husband, Tom, altogether. She comes home and feels very distant from Tom and doesn't try to bridge that gap anymore because she feels like when she tries, it just doesn't work out. And Tom's not trying himself, so why even bother? So over time, she begins to kind of pull back. He and Tom are like ships crossing in the night. Sometimes they have little moments together, but usually there's just not much there. They begin to live parallel lives. And Sarah, meanwhile, is connecting more and more with Jonathan at work. They begin to hang out a little bit outside of work, maybe to a concert here or there. They connect at an offsite for work. And one day, connecting after work, they've had a few drinks, and Sarah slips into infidelity with Jonathan. She doesn't just go for this emotional intimacy that she's been sharing with him, but she realizes that she's also attracted to him, and one thing turns into another, and she cheats. Now, this may sound like a scenario directly out of central casting, but it was something that in Dr. John Gottman's research, he's found is very typical for affairs, is that emotional affairs begin when emotional intimacy declines. Maybe one partner feels unappreciated but doesn't vocalize it because they're not good at speaking up. Maybe one partner tries, like in Sarah's story, to connect with her partner, but the other partner is distracted, they're not present, and they just don't have the motivation or energy to really keep trying with their partner, to keep building that connection. For whatever reason, that emotional disconnection is there. It may start small, but it begins to grow over time as more and more emotional bids are missed. Now, what are emotional bids? Now, I've talked about this in another video, but Dr. John Gottman talks about emotional bids as kind of pleas for connection. When one partner reaches out to touch your hand or tries to show you something that they're interested in or tell you about their day, it's an example of them reaching out to their partner for connection, for a response from them. And when those emotional bids happen but are missed by the partner, that lack of connection begins to grow and deepen over time. Eventually, as this happens more and more often, one partner begins to shift their emotional investment elsewhere. It could be through friendship, through hobbies, through work, through even just flirtatious conversations with somebody who's not your partner. They begin to shift and invest in something else that's outside of the relationship. You begin to look elsewhere. Eventually, what started off as something innocent leads to a boundary crossing. One thing leads to another, and the deeper that connection is, the more likely there's a scenario that's going to pop up where one person eventually kind of invests too heavily, and it turns from an emotional affair into a physical affair. In this case, physical infidelity or cheating is really the last step. There's lots of different types of infidelity that can occur. Emotional infidelity, where you're investing that heavily in an emotional connection, emotional vulnerability with another person outside of your partnership, is real, and that is a form of cheating. And it can still feel like a betrayal or a breach of trust with your partner, even if it's not physical. That is this slow downward spiral into infidelity that can often occur in even the strongest partnerships. So how do we go about preventing this from happening in our relationship? Well, the trick to preventing it is really just the opposite of that slow downward spiral. You want to strengthen those bonds of connection, of vulnerability, of intimacy with you and your partner, and reinforce the boundaries that you have with people outside of your relationship. The first is to strengthen that window with your partner. That means investing in them and really becoming emotionally intimate. That means making time for meaningful conversations, sharing your vulnerabilities, and keeping that connection alive. A good example of this is making time for date nights, where you and your partner can actually share things that are important to each other and relearn things about your partner that maybe you've lost touch with over the last few years. The next is to set clear emotional and physical boundaries with people outside of your relationship, to strengthen those walls that you have with the outside world. Now, what can that look like? Boundaries here can be tricky because we want to still be able to have friendships that are with people who are of the opposite sex. If you are saying something to another person that you would normally only share with your partner, then that's probably a boundary crossing. If you're having a conversation, and this can also include body language and how you're interacting in that conversation, where you wouldn't want your partner to come up on you and notice the way that you're acting or the types of things that you're saying or the body language that you're exhibiting, that's likely a boundary crossing. And having strong boundaries means being empathetic with your partner and understanding how they might perceive things and what you would also want from them if you were to see them interacting with somebody who could be potentially interested in them too. The last thing is to answer those bids for connection. So pay attention, and this really is where mindfulness comes into play. But the trick here is to really notice what's going on in your partner's world. And if they are reaching out for connection by trying to show you something or talk about their day, the goal here is to be mindful and present in that moment and respond in kind. So trying to show you something cool on their phone or tell you about their day, stop what you're doing and listen and ask questions. Really get curious and get interested in what your partner has going on in their world. It will go a long way. Now, we've all had situations where our partner tries to show us something and we're not actually that interested. The goal here is to know that it matters to them, and because it matters to them, it matters to you. To lean in, try to be interested, and answer those bids for connection. So understanding how that downward spiral into infidelity occurs is super important here. And I've given you a few tools that you can use to strengthen that bond in your own relationship and protect yourself from infidelity happening for you. And let me know in the comments down below if any of this has resonated with you. And if you like this video, please give it a thumbs up for the YouTube algorithm. Share it with somebody who might be interested. Thank you so much.